The first thing I remember after the darkness took me was the sound of my own gasping breath, amplified by a plastic mask strapped tight against my face. My body was bouncing violently. I tried to lift my hand to pull the mask off, to tell them I couldn't breathe, but my arms felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped inside a body that was shutting down, while a siren wailed somewhere right above my head. BP is dropping. We're losing her pressure. A voice shouted. It was a man's voice, rough and urgent. I felt a gloved hand press hard against my wrist. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him to stop the ambulance, to tell him that this was all a mistake. I was just at Sunday dinner. I was just sitting in a beautiful house in Newport News, looking at my granddaughter's drawings on the fridge. I wasn't supposed to be dying in the back of a rig, but the darkness was creeping back in at the edges of my vision. And in that darkness, I didn't see the paramedic's face. I saw hers. Amber, my son's wife. My mind replayed the moment on a loop, clear as day, cutting through the fog of the diabetic shock. I was sitting at the kitchen island. The granite was cold under my hands. Amber was standing there, holding that heavy crystal pitcher of iced tea. Condensation was dripping down the sides. She looked like the perfect suburban housewife, smiling that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Here you go, Danielle," she had said, freshly brewed. I had hesitated. Everyone in that house knew I was a diabetic. Everyone knew that sugar wasn't just bad for me, it was dangerous. I had managed my condition for 20 years. I knew what I could touch and what I couldn't. "Is it unsweetened?" I asked. I remembered feeling guilty for asking, for being difficult. I always felt like a burden in that house. Amber had laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, relax, Danielle. It's mostly unsweetened. It's just a little sweetness. Stop being so dramatic. It's just a little sweetness." That was the line. That was the sentence that put me in this stretcher. I looked at the glass. I looked at her. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want Joe, my son, to sigh and tell me I was being critical of his wife again. So I lifted the glass. The first sip hit my tongue, and I knew it wasn't just sweet. It was syrup. It was thick with sugar. But Amber was staring at me, her eyes locked on mine, daring me to spit it out, daring me to complain. So I swallowed. I swallowed the poison because I was too afraid to be rude. Back in the ambulance, the paramedic shined a light into my eyes. "Can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I tried. I swear I tried. But the sugar was already ravaging my system. My throat felt like it was closing up. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just a slip-up. This wasn't a mistake. As the ambulance hit a pothole, jolting my spine, a terrifying clarity washed over me. I remembered what happened right after I drank it. The dizziness hit me like a sledgehammer. I had grabbed the counter for support, gasping. And Amber? She didn't rush to call 911. She didn't scream for Joe. She just stood there. She watched me gasp. She watched me clutch my throat. She watched me slide off the stool and onto the floor. And she smiled. The realization hit me harder than the medical crisis. This wasn't an accident. She didn't forget I was diabetic. She didn't accidentally use the wrong pitcher. She looked me in the eye and fed me the one thing she knew could kill me. "She's seizing," the paramedic yelled. "Push the glucose now." No, not glucose, I wanted to scream. It's too much sugar. But I couldn't form the words. I was fading again. The last thing I thought before the blackness swallowed me whole was simple and terrifying. My son's wife didn't just spike my tea. She tried to erase me. And if I didn't wake up from this, she was going to get away with it. To understand why I drank that tea, why I felt I had no choice but to swallow something I knew was dangerous, you have to understand that I wasn't just a guest at that dinner table. I was a prisoner in a house I helped pay for. 6 months before the ambulance arrived, I had a life. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was mine. I lived in a small, two-bedroom bungalow on the south side of town. It was the house my late husband and I had bought 40 years ago. We paid off the mortgage in 1998. Every brick, every creaky floorboard belonged to me. I had my garden, my bridge club on Tuesdays, and my peace and quiet. I was independent. Then came the Sunday afternoon. That changed everything. Joe and Amber came over for lunch. I could tell they wanted something, because Amber was actually being nice. She complimented my pot roast, which she usually called too salty, and she asked about my garden. After dessert, Joe cleared his throat and laid a glossy brochure on the table. "Mom," he said, "we found a house in Newport News. It's perfect. It's in the best school district for the kids. It's safe, and it's huge." I looked at the pictures. It was a mansion compared to my little bungalow. "It's beautiful, Joe. I'm happy for you." "That's the thing," Joe said, looking at Amber for reassurance. "We can't do it alone. The down payment is steep. And with the interest rates, we were thinking, you're getting older. Dad is gone. Why are you living here all alone? This new house, it has a mother-in-law suite." Amber leaned in, her eyes wide and sincere. "It's not just a room, Danielle. It's an apartment. It's on the ground floor, so no stairs. It has its own entrance, a kitchenette, and a private bathroom. You'd have your own space, but we'd be right there if you needed anything. We want to take care of you." I should have asked more questions. I should have seen the dollar signs in their eyes. But I was 68. My knees were starting to ache when it rained. The thought of being alone if I fell, or if my sugar dropped too low, terrified me. The idea of being surrounded by family, of watching my grandchildren grow up every day, was intoxicating. "We just need a little help with the down payment," Joe said softly. "If you sold this place, you could put that money into our house. It would be an investment in your future care." I sold my house. It sold quickly. After the fees and paying off a few small debts, I had a cashier's check for $80,000. That was everything I had. My safety net. My life's work. I remember the day I handed it to Joe. We were standing in the kitchen of the new house. The sunlight was pouring in through the massive windows. I felt a knot in my stomach as I passed the check to him. "This is everything, Joe," I told him. "This is my independence." "I know, Mom," he said, hugging me. "I promise you'll be happy here." But the lies started the day I moved in. When the moving truck pulled up, I asked to see the suite. I was excited to arrange my favorite armchair and set up my kettle in my new kitchenette. About that, Amber said, not even looking up from her phone, "The contractor is behind schedule. The suite isn't quite ready. You'll have to stay in the guest room upstairs for a few weeks." I walked into the suite. It wasn't an apartment. It was a glorified storage unit. There was no drywall, no flooring, no kitchenette, just bare studs and concrete. It wasn't days away from completion. It was months, maybe years away. We used the extra money for the closing costs. Joe mumbled, avoiding my eyes, "We'll get to it, Mom. Just give us time." A few weeks turned into a month, then 3, then 6. I was living out of a suitcase in a guest room that wasn't mine. I had no space to call my own. My furniture, my husband's favorite chair, my dining table, the antique dresser. Amber said it didn't fit the aesthetic of the new house. She made me sell it all or put it in storage. I watched my life get carted away by strangers, leaving me with nothing but my clothes and my glucometer. And I wasn't the matriarch of the family. I was the help, because I was home all day, It just made sense for me to handle things. Amber worked in real estate and was always busy. So, the laundry became my job. The cleaning became my job. If the kids were sick and couldn't go to school, I was the babysitter. I was cooking dinner for 5 people every night, trying to accommodate everyone's tastes while managing my own strict diabetic diet. If I cooked something healthy, Amber would sigh, "The kids won't eat this, Danielle. It's too bland. Can't you make something normal?" I was walking on eggshells in a house that my $80,000 had secured. I paid for the granite countertops. I was scrubbing. I paid for the hardwood floors. I was sweeping. But if I sat down to watch TV in the living room, Amber would come in and change the channel without asking. "I need to decompress. Danielle," she'd say, "do you mind going to your room?" My room. The guest room. The room where I wasn't allowed to put up pictures of my husband because they put holes in the drywall. I tried to bring it up to Joe. One night, I cornered him in the garage while he was working on his car. "Joe, when is the suite getting finished?" I asked. "I can't keep climbing those stairs. And I need my own kitchen. I need to control my own food." Joe wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and sighed the sigh of a man who has given up. "Mom, money is tight right now. The mortgage is higher than we thought. We can't afford a contractor yet. Just be patient. You have a roof over your head. You're with family. Isn't that enough?" He made me feel ungrateful. He made me feel like a burden. But the worst part wasn't the chores or the stairs. It was the trapped feeling. I had no car. My old sedan had broken down. And Joe said it wasn't worth fixing since we can just drive you where you need to go. But they were never available. I was stranded in suburbia. I couldn't drive away. I couldn't move out because I had no money left. It was all in the equity of their house. I had no home to go back to because I had sold it. I had traded my freedom for a promise. And now I realized the promise was hollow. I was an unpaid maid who had paid $80,000 for the privilege of being treated like a nuisance. So when Amber handed me that tea, you have to understand, I wasn't just afraid of her. I was afraid of losing the roof over my head. I had no power. I had no leverage. I was completely, utterly at their mercy. And they knew it. The sweet tea incident didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't a sudden, out-of-the-blue mistake. It was the finale of a long, quiet war that Amber had been waging against me for months. A war fought in the kitchen, in the pantry, and with my own sanity. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, with the groceries. When I lived in my own bungalow, my diet was my religion. I had to be strict. Fresh greens, lean proteins, very few carbs. It was how I stayed off insulin injections for 15 years. But once I moved into the Golden Cage in Newport News, I lost control of the shopping list. Amber insisted on doing the grocery shopping. "I'm already going, Danielle, don't worry about it," she'd say. But she would come back with bags full of white pasta, white rice, sugary cereals for the kids, and frozen pizzas. "Where are the vegetables, Amber?" I asked one Tuesday, looking through the bags. I asked for spinach and maybe some zucchini. She slammed a box of macaroni and cheese onto the counter. "Produce is so expensive right now, Danielle, and it just goes bad in the fridge because no one else eats it. I can't buy special food just for you. We're on a budget." A budget. The irony burned. I had just given them $80,000, but we couldn't afford a bag of spinach. So dinner became a battleground. Amber would serve huge, heavy casseroles, tater tot hot dish, creamy Alfredo with no protein, or lasagna layered with sugar-heavy tomato sauce. "Just eat it, Mom," Joe would say, shoveling food into his mouth. "It's delicious." "I can't, Joe," I'd whisper. "It's all starch. My sugar will spike." Amber would drop her fork onto her plate with a loud clatter. The whole table would go silent. I spent 2 hours cooking after working all day, she'd say, her voice trembling with fake hurt. And it's never good enough. Danielle, you could just pick around the noodles. You don't have to be so difficult. So I would sit there, hungry, picking tiny pieces of ground beef out of a mountain of pasta, feeling the shame burn my cheeks. I started buying my own safe snacks, almonds, sugar-free jerky, and hiding them in my underwear drawer like a criminal, just so I wouldn't starve. But the food was just the beginning. The real terror started when my medical supplies began to vanish. As a diabetic, my glucometer is my lifeline. I check my blood sugar 4 times a day. If I don't know my numbers, I don't know if I'm safe. One morning, I woke up feeling off. My hands were trembling, and I had a cold sweat on the back of my neck. I knew the feeling. My sugar was dropping. I stumbled to the nightstand in the guest room to grab my kit. It wasn't there. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. I always put it right next to the lamp. Always. I checked the drawer. I checked under the bed. I checked the bathroom. Panic started to rise in my chest. If I dropped too low, I could pass out. I went downstairs, holding the railing tightly because my knees were shaking. Amber was in the kitchen, making coffee. "Amber," I gasped, "have you seen my testing kit? I left it on my nightstand." She didn't turn around. "No. Why would I touch your medical stuff? I can't find it. I need it. I think I'm low." She took a slow sip of her coffee, then turned to look at me with a pitying expression. "Danielle, are you sure you didn't leave it in the living room? You've been so forgetful lately. It's actually getting a little concerning." "I'm not forgetful." I snapped, the fear making me sharp. "I put it on the nightstand." Okay, calm down," she said, raising her hands. "I'll help you look, but you really need to stop misplacing things." We looked for 10 minutes. Finally, Amber found it. It was deep inside the linen closet in the hallway, buried under a stack of towels. "See," she said, handing it to me like I was a toddler. "You probably put it there when you were putting away laundry and forgot. You really need to see a doctor about your memory, Danielle." I stared at the device in my hand. I hadn't put away laundry in 2 days. I hadn't opened that closet. She had moved it. I knew she had moved it. She was trying to make me think I was losing my mind. She was gaslighting me. I pricked my finger. My sugar was 58, dangerously low. If I hadn't found it, I could have seized. That night, I waited for Joe to come home. I knew I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I pulled him into the garage, away from Amber's ears. "Joe, she hid my glucometer," I said, my voice shaking. "She's buying food she knows I can't eat. She's doing this on purpose." I expected him to be shocked. I expected him to be angry on my behalf. Instead, he rubbed his temples and let out a long, exhausted groan. "Mom, please," he said, "don't start this again." "I'm not starting anything. She put my medical equipment in the linen closet. I could have gone into shock, Joe." "She said you misplaced it," Joe said, looking at his shoes. "She said you've been acting confused lately. Mom, Amber is stressed. She's working. She's dealing with the house. She's dealing with the kids. She doesn't have time to play hide and seek with your stuff. You're being paranoid." "Paranoid?" I felt tears prick my eyes. "Joe, I paid for this house. I am your mother. Why do you believe her over me?" "Because she's my wife," he snapped. Then he softened, seeing the hurt on my face. "Look, just try to get along. Eat what she cooks. Don't make waves. Keep the peace, okay? For me, I just want some peace in my own home." That was the moment I realized I was truly alone. I looked around that affluent neighborhood. From the outside, our house looked perfect. Manicured lawn, 2 luxury cars in the driveway. But inside, I was starving and terrified. I felt like a pauper living in a palace. I saw the neighbors walking their dogs, smiling, waving. If I ran out there and told them, "My daughter-in-law is hiding my medicine," They would think I was a senile old woman. Amber had set the stage perfectly. She had convinced Joe I was losing my memory. She had convinced him I was difficult. So when she finally decided to hurt me, when she finally decided to hand me that glass of poisoned tea, she knew exactly what would happen. She knew Joe wouldn't blame her. He would blame me. He would think I was just confused again, or that I had eaten something I shouldn't have. I went back to my room that night and wedged a chair under the doorknob. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the house settle, realizing that the invisible war was over. I had lost. Now, it was just a matter of survival. Sunday arrived with a kind of frantic energy that always took over the house when Amber was hosting. This wasn't a family potluck, it was a performance. Amber had invited 2 other couples from the neighborhood, wealthy, polished people who drove imported SUVs and spoke in hushed tones about their stock portfolios. I was told to dress appropriately. I went into my closet and pulled out the navy blue dress I had worn to my husband's retirement party 5 years ago. It was the only nice thing I had left that wasn't packed away in a storage unit I couldn't access. As I looked in the mirror, smoothing down the fabric, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I knew my role for the evening. I was to be the quiet, grateful grandmother. The prop. When I walked downstairs, the house smelled of roasted garlic and expensive perfume. The table was set with the good china, the plates I wasn't allowed to touch on normal days. There she is, Amber announced as I entered the dining room. She was wearing a silk blouse and holding a glass of white wine. Her friends turned to look at me with polite, tight-lipped smiles. "Everyone, this is Joe's mother, Danielle. She lives with us now." She said it with a tone that implied charity, as if she had rescued a stray dog from the rain. "Hello," I said, forcing a smile. "It's lovely to meet you all." "Danielle, sit here," Amber directed, pointing to the chair at the far end of the table, furthest from the conversation. Dinner was a blur of chatter about country club memberships and kitchen renovations. I stayed quiet, nodding when appropriate, trying to make myself as small as possible. The main course was a heavy risotto, rich with cream and starch. I took a small portion, knowing I had to be careful. I looked around for water, but my glass was empty. "Oh, I almost forgot," Amber exclaimed, clapping her hands together. The sound cut through the room, silencing the guests. She stood up and walked to the kitchen island, returning with a large crystal pitcher filled with dark iced tea. "I made something special just for Danielle," she announced, loudly beaming at her friends. "We all know how fragile her health is, and she's always complaining that she can't have the wine or the cocktails. So I brewed a special pitcher of unsweetened tea just for her." The guests cooed. "Oh, that is so thoughtful of you, Amber," one of the women said. "You really take such good care of her." Amber poured a tall glass and set it down in front of me with a flourish. "Drink up, Danielle. It's fresh." All eyes were on me. The good daughter-in-law had performed her act of kindness, and now the ungrateful mother-in-law had to play her part. "Thank you, Amber," I said softly. I lifted the glass. The condensation was cold against my fingers. I took a sip. My heart stopped. It was sweet. It wasn't just a hint of sweetness from the tea leaves. It was aggressive. It tasted like syrup. The sugar hit my tongue instantly, thick and undeniable. I froze, the liquid still in my mouth, panic flaring in my chest. I lowered the glass slowly. My mind raced. Maybe it's stevia, I thought, desperately. Maybe she used Splenda? She knows I can't have sugar. She knows it could kill me. I looked up at Amber. She was standing at the head of the table, watching me. Her smile was fixed, but her eyes were cold, hard flint. She wasn't waiting for a thank you. She was daring me. She was daring me to say, "This is sweet." She was daring me to embarrass her in front of her rich friends. If I spoke up, I would be the senile old woman ruining the dinner party. I would be the difficult mother-in-law accusing her saintly caretaker of a mistake. I looked at Joe. He was laughing at something the man next to him had said, completely oblivious. If I caused a scene now, he would be furious. He had begged me to keep the peace. It has to be artificial sweetener, I told myself. She wouldn't actually poison me in front of witnesses. I'm just being paranoid, like Joe said. So, I made the mistake that nearly cost me my life. I swallowed. Is it good, Danielle? Amber asked, her voice dripping with false concern. It's very sweet, I managed to say, my voice tight. Oh, I put a splash of agave in it, she dismissed, waving her hand. Whatever. It's natural. Drink it, you need to stay hydrated. Agave is sugar. It's pure sugar. But before I could protest, the conversation moved on, and I was left alone with the glass. I took another sip, then another, driven by a nervous compulsion to look normal, to look grateful. I finished the glass. The reaction wasn't immediate, which is the terrifying part about a sugar spike. It creeps up on you. 10 minutes passed. I was listening to the man across from me talk about his boat when the first wave hit. It started as a fierce, unquenchable thirst. My mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I reached for the pitcher and poured myself more, thinking the fluid would help, not realizing I was just adding fuel to the fire. 5 minutes later, the heat started. It began in my chest and radiated out to my limbs. I felt sweat beading on my forehead, my upper lip. The room, which had been comfortably cool a moment ago, suddenly felt like a sauna. I unbuttoned the top button of my cardigan. My hands were shaking. I looked down at my plate, and the risotto seemed to be swimming. Joe, I whispered. He didn't hear me. Joe, I said a little louder. He turned, looking annoyed. What, Mom? I don't feel well. Amber's head snapped toward me. Oh, honestly, Danielle, we're in the middle of a story. No, I mumbled. My tongue felt heavy, too big for my mouth. The words were slurring, my head spinning. I tried to push my chair back to stand up. I needed to get to my room. I needed my insulin. But my legs didn't work. They felt like rubber, completely disconnected from my brain. As I tried to rise, my knees buckled, and I stumbled hard against the table. The silverware clattered. The wine glasses rattled. The room went silent. I gripped the edge of the table, gasping for air. My vision was blurring, tunneling down to a pinprick of light. I could hear the guests gasping. Oh my God, is she okay? Someone asked. And then I heard Amber's voice. It wasn't concerned. It was amused. Oh, ignore her. Amber laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that pierced through the fog in my brain. She's just had a little too much wine. I told her to stick to the tea, but you know how she gets. I didn't. I tried to say. The tea. Look at her, Amber continued, speaking to her friends as if I were a naughty toddler. She gets so dramatic when she wants attention. Joe, help her up. She's embarrassing herself. Joe stood up, his face red with humiliation. Mom, come on, he hissed, grabbing my arm. Get up. You're making a scene. He pulled on my arm, but I couldn't stand. My body was shutting down. The high blood sugar was turning my blood acidic. I felt a wave of nausea, so violent it doubled me over. Help me, I gasped. She's faking it, Amber said, her voice sounding further and further away. She just wants to ruin the night because she hates that we're having fun. That was the last thing I heard clearly. The room tilted sideways. The expensive china, the faces of the strangers, the chandelier, it all slid away. I felt my grip on the table slip. I hit the floor with a heavy thud. The impact didn't hurt. I was too far gone to feel pain. I was just drowning in the sugar she had fed me, listening to the muffled sounds of my son apologizing to his guests for his mother's behavior, while I lay dying on his hardwood floor. Waking up didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, painful crawl out of a deep, black well. The first thing I noticed was the sound, a rhythmic, relentless beeping that seemed to match the pounding in my head. Beep, beep, beep. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was as dry as sand. My tongue felt swollen, too big for my throat. I tried to lift my hand to rub my eyes, but something tugged at my wrist. I forced my heavy eyelids open and saw the plastic tube snake its way from a bag of clear liquid down into the back of my hand. I was in a hospital room. The lights were dimmed, but the machines around me were glowing with numbers and jagged lines. I wasn't dead. A nurse was adjusting something on the four-pole. She looked young, tired but kind. When she saw my eyes open, she smiled softly. "Welcome back, Mrs. Curry. You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but it came out as a rasp. "Water." She brought a cup with a straw to my lips. The water was cool, but it didn't quench the deep, bone-dry thirst I felt. That thirst, I knew what that was. It was the sugar. A few minutes later, a doctor walked in. He didn't look like the friendly doctors on TV. He looked exhausted and stern. He picked up the chart hanging at the foot of my bed and flipped through it, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Curry," he said, his voice flat. "Do you know where you are?" "Hospital," I croaked. "You're in the ICU," he corrected. "You were brought in with a blood glucose level of over 800. You were in a hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state. To put it simply, your blood had turned into syrup. Your kidneys were shutting down. Another hour, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." 800. My normal range was supposed to be under 140. I stared at him, horrified. I started but stopped. How could I explain? My daughter-in-law gave me sweet tea. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded like something a child would say. The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses. "Mrs. Curry, diabetes isn't a game. You cannot ignore your diet at your age. This kind of negligence is, well, it's suicidal." Negligence. He thought I did this to myself. I didn't eat sugar. I whispered. I was given rest now. He cut me off, not unkindly but dismissively. He clearly had his mind made up. "We need to stabilize your electrolytes. We'll talk about a management plan later." He walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I closed my eyes, feeling tears of frustration prick at the corners. He thought I was just a non-compliant old woman who couldn't control her sweet tooth. Then I heard them. Voices in the hallway, just outside my door. They were hushed, but in the quiet of the ICU, they carried clearly. "I just don't know what to do anymore, doctor." It was Amber. Her voice was trembling, pitch perfect in its performance of the distressed caregiver. "She's been so difficult lately," Amber continued. "We try so hard. I cook her special meals. I buy all the sugar-free snacks, but she sneaks food. I found candy wrappers under her bed last week. Snickers, Milky Ways, she hides them in her laundry." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Candy wrappers? I hadn't eaten a candy bar in 20 years. She was lying. She was lying to the doctor, who had just scolded me. "I see," the doctor's voice replied. He sounded sympathetic now. "That is common with patients who feel restricted. They rebel." "It's not just the food," Amber went on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's her mind. She forgets things. She gets confused about where she is. Yesterday, she thought it was 1995. And she gets aggressive when we try to help her. Honestly, doctor, I'm worried she's, well, getting senile." We can't watch her 24/7. We have kids. It's becoming dangerous for her to be in the house. My heart hammered against my ribs, so hard the monitor sped up. Beep, 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 beep. Senile. Dangerous. Aggressive. She wasn't just covering her tracks. She was building a case. I lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, and the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. This wasn't just about hating me. This wasn't just about being annoyed that I lived with them. This was a strategy. If they could prove I was mentally incompetent, if they could get a doctor to sign off that I had dementia and couldn't manage my own health, they could take control. They could get power of attorney. They could control my Social Security checks. And worst of all, they could dump me in a state-run nursing home, claim it was for my own safety, and keep my $80,000 invested in their house. They would keep the house. I would get a bed in a ward. And Joe, the doctor asked, how is he handling this? He's devastated, Amber sighed. But he knows we might have to make some hard decisions. We just want what's best for Mom. Joe, my son, he was standing right there. I strained my ears, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say, no, doctor, my mother is sharp as a tack. She doesn't eat candy. She's the most disciplined woman I know. Yeah, Joe's voice mumbled. He sounded defeated. We just want her to be safe. If she can't live with us safely, then... He trailed off. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. His silence was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. He was going to let her do it. He was going to let her paint me as a senile invalid to save his marriage and his bank account. The doctor spoke again. Well, let's focus on getting her physical strength back first. But I will put a note in her file for a cognitive evaluation. A social worker will stop by tomorrow to discuss long-term care options. Thank you, doctor, Amber said. You're a lifesaver. Footsteps faded down the hall. In that hospital bed, hooked up to machines that were keeping me alive, something inside me broke. But it wasn't my spirit. It was my denial. For months, I had been telling myself that it was just a bad living situation, that they were stressed, that deep down, they loved me. I had made excuses for them because the alternative, that my own family viewed me as a disposable resource, was too painful to bear. But the pain was gone now. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked at the foretube. I looked at the bruised skin on my arms. I realized that if I went back to that house as the same person who left it, the quiet, people-pleasing mother who just wanted to keep the peace, I would never leave again. I would die there, or I would die in a cheap nursing home, wondering where I went wrong. Amber had made a mistake, though. She thought I was weak. She thought I was the fragile old lady she mocked at dinner. She didn't know who I was before I was her mother-in-law. She didn't know the woman who raised a son alone after her husband was deployed. She didn't know the woman who managed a household budget on pennies. I wasn't senile. I wasn't confused. And I wasn't going to let them win. The door handle turned. I quickly closed my eyes, slowing my breathing. I needed them to think I was asleep. I needed them to think their plan was working. She's out cold, Amber whispered as they walked into the room. God, look at her. She looks terrible. Don't, Joe whispered back. I'm just saying, Joe, it's for the best. We can't keep doing this. I lay there, listening to them discuss my disposal, and I made a vow. I would pass their cognitive evaluation with flying colors. I would get discharged, and then I was going to get the hell out of their lives. But first, I had to survive the hospital, and I had to act the part. If they wanted a confused old lady, I wouldn't give them one. I would give them something else entirely, a ghost. I would be silent. I would be compliant. I wouldn't argue. I would let them think I was broken until the moment I was strong enough to walk out the door. The golden cage was about to lose its prisoner. The hospital discharge process was a blur of paperwork and fake smiles. I signed the forms with a steady hand, ignoring the tremor that still lingered in my fingers. The social worker had come by earlier, armed with pamphlets for assisted living facilities, just as Amber had planned. But I had surprised them all. I answered every question on the cognitive test correctly. I remembered the date, the president, and the 3 random words they asked me to recall 10 minutes later. Apple, table, penny. I wasn't confused. I was just poisoned. And now I was going back. The car ride home was suffocating. Joe drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Amber sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating her sharp profile. I sat in the back, staring out the window at the passing suburbs of Newport News. It was a beautiful day, sunny and bright, which felt like a cruel joke considering the storm I was about to unleash. No one spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. When we pulled into the driveway, the house loomed over us. It used to look impressive to me, a symbol of my son's success, a place where I thought I would spend my final years in comfort. Now, it looked like a trap. The manicured lawn, the grand entrance, it was all a facade hiding the rot inside. Joe turned off the engine, but didn't open his door. "Mom," he started, his voice strained. "Maybe you should go straight to bed when we get in. You've been through a lot." "I'm not going to bed, Joe," I said, my voice clearer than it had been in days. "I'm going to my room." I opened the car door myself and stepped onto the driveway. My legs felt weak, but my resolve held me up. I walked to the front door, the key feeling heavy in my pocket. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The house smelled the same, lemon polish and stale air. The dining room table, where I had collapsed, was cleared. The floor was spotless. It was as if I had never fallen. It was as if the incident had been wiped away, just like they hoped I would be. I walked past the kitchen, refusing to look at the island where the tea had been poured. I went straight to the guest room, my room, and pulled my old, battered suitcase out from the back of the closet. I threw it onto the bed and unzipped it. The sound was loud in the quiet house. I started pulling clothes from the dresser. Sweaters, slacks, my nightgowns. I didn't fold them. I just threw them in. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned around. Amber was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. She wasn't smiling anymore. The concerned daughter-in-law mask was gone, replaced by a look of pure annoyance. "I'm packing, Amber," I said, not stopping. I grabbed a handful of socks. "Packing? For what?" "A trip." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Danielle, you just got out of the ICU. You're not going anywhere. Put that away and lie down before you hurt yourself again." "I'm not hurting myself," I said, turning to face her fully. "You're the one doing that." The air in the room changed instantly. It went cold. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into the room. It was an intimidation tactic. She was taller than me, younger, stronger. But I didn't back down. "I heard you," I said, "in the hospital hallway. I heard you telling the doctor I was senile. I heard you lying about candy wrappers. And I know about the tea, Amber. I know it wasn't agave. I know you spiked it." For a second, I thought she would deny it. I expected her to gasp, to feign shock, to call Joe in and tell him I was raving again. But she didn't. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her face relaxed. It wasn't a look of guilt. It was relief. She was tired of pretending, too. "So what if I did?" she said. Her voice was quiet, venomous. The admission hit me like a physical blow. I had suspected it. I had known it, but hearing her say it, it stole the breath from my lungs. "You admit it?" I whispered. "You could have killed me." Oh, stop it, she snapped, rolling her eyes. You're so dramatic. It was a sugar spike. You have insulin. You would have figured it out eventually. Why? I asked. Why do you hate me this much? I gave you everything. I gave you my money. I cook your food. I clean your house. Amber took a step closer, and her face twisted into a sneer that made her look ugly despite her perfect makeup. Because you are a burden, Danielle, she shouted. The volume made me flinch. Look at you. You're always here. You're always in the way. We can't have friends over without you hovering. We can't have a private conversation in our own kitchen. You take up space. She gestured wildly around the room. We wanted the money for the house. Yes. We needed it. But we didn't want you attached to it forever. We thought you'd help out, maybe travel, have a life. Instead, you're just existing, sitting on our couch, eating our food, waiting to die. I felt my knees shaking, but I locked them. I gave you $80,000. I said, my voice trembling with rage. I paid for this room. I paid for the roof over your head. And you've gotten your money's worth in rent and food, she yelled back. Do you know how expensive it is to feed you, to drive you around? You're a drain on us, Danielle. Joe is too afraid to say it because he's a good son, but we all want you gone. Even the kids think you're weird. That broke me. The kids. My grandchildren. Joe. I screamed. I didn't care who heard. Joe. I needed him to hear this. I needed him to defend me. Joe appeared in the doorway behind Amber. He looked pale, terrified. He had been listening. He had heard every word. Joe, I said, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. She just admitted it. She admitted she wants me gone. She admitted she spiked the tea. Tell her, Joe, tell her she's wrong. I waited. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had sent to college, the boy I had loved more than my own life. I waited for him to step forward, to tell his wife to get out, to protect his mother. Joe looked at Amber. She glared at him, daring him to speak. Then, Joe looked at the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Mom, he mumbled, talking to the carpet. You have to admit, it has been really hard having you here. It's a lot of pressure on Amber. The silence that followed was louder than Amber's screaming. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He was choosing her. He was choosing the woman who had poisoned his mother because it was easier than fighting her. He was choosing his comfort over my life. Pressure? I whispered. I almost died, Joe. I know, he said, still looking down. But maybe it is time we looked at other arrangements. Like Amber said, for everyone's happiness. He walked away. He turned his back on me and walked down the hall, leaving me alone in the room with the woman who hated me. Amber smirked. It was a victory lap. See, she said softly. You have no one, Danielle. Pack your bags. Or don't. But you're not staying here tonight. She turned and left, flipping her hair over her shoulder. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by my half-packed clothes. My heart was shattered, not by the cruelty of my enemy, but by the silence of my son. I realized then that the hospital hadn't been the bottom. I wasn't just losing a place to live. I had lost my family. I looked at the suitcase. I didn't cry. I was done crying. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. They wanted me gone. Fine. But I wasn't going to just disappear. I was going to leave, and I was going to make sure they remembered exactly what they lost. I resumed packing. This time, I moved faster. I wasn't packing to visit somewhere. I was packing to escape. The sound of a zipper closing has never sounded so final. I stood in the guest room, the room I had paid for, but never truly owned, and looked at my 2 suitcases. That was it. 68 years of life, 40 years of marriage, and decades of hard work, all boiled down to 2 bags of clothes and a toiletry kit. I didn't pack the winter coats. I didn't pack the books. I left the few knickknacks I had been allowed to display on the dresser. I didn't want anything that had absorbed the air of this house. I just wanted out. I pulled the handle of the rolling suitcase and walked into the hallway. The wheels rumbled loudly on the hardwood floor, a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. I made it to the top of the stairs when Joe stepped out of the master bedroom. He looked frantic. His hair was messy, and his face was flushed. It wasn't the look of a son worried about his mother's health. It was the look of a manager realizing his only employee was quitting in the middle of a shift. "Mom," he said, blocking my path to the stairs. "Mom, stop. Where do you think you're going?" "I'm leaving, Joe," I said calmly. My voice didn't shake. I was past the point of tears. I called a cab. "It's 5 minutes away." "A cab?" He laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "To go where? You don't have an apartment. You don't have a car. You're just being dramatic again. Put the bags down, and let's talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about," I said, gripping the handle of my suitcase tighter. Amber made it clear. "I'm a burden. I take up space. So, I'm removing the burden." I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again. Panic was setting in behind his eyes. "You can't just leave," he snapped. "Who is going to watch the kids tomorrow? Amber has a showing at 9. I have meetings all day. We count on you, Mom. You can't just walk out on your family." I stared at him, stunned. That was it. That was the reason. He wasn't stopping me because he would miss me. He wasn't stopping me because he was worried I would die alone in a hotel room. He was stopping me because he was losing his free babysitter. He was losing his maid. He was losing the woman who scrubbed his toilets and cooked his meals for $0 an hour. "I am not your employee, Joe," I said, my voice ice cold. "I am your mother. And you stood there and watched your wife tell me she wished I was gone. You made your choice. Now move." I pushed past him. I wasn't strong, but the adrenaline gave me enough force to shove past his shoulder. I started maneuvering the heavy suitcase down the stairs, one step at a time. Thump, thump, thump. Joe scrambled down after me, getting in front of the front door, effectively trapping me in the foyer. Amber appeared at the top of the stairs, watching, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. She wanted me gone, but she was letting Joe do the dirty work. "Mom, listen to me," Joe said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You're not thinking this through." "I have never thought more clearly," I replied. "Really?" Joe stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Okay, let's talk reality. You sold your house. You gave us the money. That $80,000, it's in the walls of this house, Mom. It's in the equity." I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. I knew where this was going. "You're not on the deed," Joe said. He said it slowly, enunciating every word like a lawyer. "We never got around to adding you, remember? Legally, that money was a gift, a family contribution. It was an investment." I whispered. "It was for the suite, for my care." "But there's no contract," Joe countered. "If you walk out that door right now, you are walking away from your entire life savings. We can't pay you back. We don't have $80,000 sitting in a bank account. It's tied up in the mortgage." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "If you leave, Mom, you leave with nothing. You'll be destitute. You'll be on the street. You're 68 years old, on a fixed income. How long do you think you'll last out there without our help, without your money?" The silence in the foyer was deafening. He was right. That $80,000 wasn't just money. It was 40 years of my husband's overtime shifts. It was decades of clipping coupons. It was the vacations we never took, so we could save for a rainy day. It was my safety net. It was the only thing standing between me and poverty. If I stayed, I kept my investment. I kept a roof over my head. I kept the financial security I had worked my whole life for. All I had to do was swallow my pride, go back to my room, and let Amber slowly poison me or drive me insane. If I left, I was throwing $80,000 into the trash. I would be walking into the unknown with nothing but a small Social Security check and 2 suitcases. For a moment, I wavered. I looked at the beautiful chandelier above us. I looked at the marble floors. I had paid for this. I owned a piece of this. Leaving meant letting them steal it from me. It felt unfair. It felt maddening. My husband would be rolling in his grave, knowing I was walking away from his hard-earned legacy. "See," Joe said, seeing my hesitation. He smiled, a smug, victorious smile. "You know I'm right. You can't afford to leave us. Now be a good mother, take your bags upstairs, and apologize to Amber. We can forget this whole tantrum happened. Apologize to Amber." The words hit me like a splash of ice water. I looked at Joe, really looked at him. I saw the weakness in his jaw. I saw the greed in his eyes. He was willing to hold my financial security hostage to keep me as a servant. He was willing to blackmail his own mother to keep his life comfortable. And I realized something profound in that hallway. Money is replaceable. It is hard to get, yes. It is painful to lose, absolutely. But it is just paper. My life, my time, I didn't know how many years I had left. 5, 10, 20? Every second I stayed in this house was a second I spent dying. I was paying $80,000 to be miserable. I was paying $80,000 to be abused. If I stayed, I would die rich on paper, but poor in spirit. If I left, I would be poor on paper, but I would be free. I took a deep breath. It was the first full, deep breath I had taken in 6 months. I looked Joe dead in the eye. "You think that money is a leash?" I said quietly. "It is," Joe said confidently. "It's reality." "No, Joe," I said, my voice rising, steady and strong. "It's just money. It's $80,000. Joe shouted, losing his composure. "You're going to walk away from $80,000? "Joe," I said, and I felt a smile touch my lips, a real, genuine smile. "I can earn more money. I can scrimp. I can save. But I cannot earn more time. I cannot buy back the months I wasted in this house being treated like a dog." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the house key. It was a heavy brass key, shiny and new. "You and Amber can keep the money," I said. "Consider it a severance package. Consider it the price of my freedom. It's the price I'm willing to pay to get you out of my life." Joe's jaw dropped. "You're bluffing. You're crazy." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm alive." I dropped the key on the marble table in the foyer. It made a sharp, ringing sound. Clink. That sounded like a bell tolling. "Goodbye, Joe." I grabbed my suitcase handle. Joe was so stunned, he didn't move to block me this time. He just stared at the key on the table, unable to comprehend that his leverage had evaporated. He couldn't understand that some things are more expensive than money. Peace of mind is the most expensive luxury in the world, and I was finally willing to pay for it. I opened the heavy front door. The fresh air rushed in, smelling of rain and cut grass. A yellow taxi was idling at the curb. I didn't look back. I didn't look at the house I helped buy. I didn't look at the son who betrayed me. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking on the pavement, dragging my life behind me. I opened the taxi door and threw my bags in. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a destination. I had left a fortune behind on a hallway table. "Just drive." I said, leaning my head back against the seat. "Drive away from here. Take me to the cheapest motel you know." As the car pulled away, I watched the house disappear around the bend. I was homeless. I was broke. I was 68 years old and starting over from zero. But for the first time in 6 months, my hands stopped shaking. I took a breath, and it tasted like freedom. I had made the most expensive decision of my life, but as the distance between me and Amber grew, I knew I had made the right one. I had bought my life back, and it was worth every penny. The taxi dropped me off at a roadside motel on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place you stay for a vacation. It was the kind of place you stay when you have nowhere else to go. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. I paid the driver with trembling hands, counting out the cash from my purse. Every dollar felt heavier now. Every dollar was a soldier I couldn't afford to lose. I checked into room 114. The carpet was worn thin, and the air smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, my 2 suitcases standing like sentries by the door. I looked around. There was no marble here, no gourmet kitchen, no mother-in-law suite, just a mini fridge that hummed too loudly and a TV bolted to the wall. For the first time since I walked out, the terror hit me. I was 68 years old. I had abandoned my life savings. I was alone in a cheap motel room with no plan and a limited bank account. I curled up on top of the scratchy bedspread, fully clothed, and stared at the water stain on the ceiling until I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the sun didn't bring hope. It brought reality. I had to find a place to live. I couldn't afford the motel's nightly rate for long. I grabbed the local paper and pulled up the rental apps on my phone. The housing market was a splash of cold water to the face. Everything was expensive. 1-bedroom apartments in safe neighborhoods were going for prices that made my jaw drop. They wanted first month, last month, and a security deposit. I did the math on a notepad. If I paid that, I wouldn't be able to eat. I spent 3 days looking. I saw basement apartments that smelled of mold. I saw shared rooms in houses with college students. I felt a deep, aching shame walking through these places. I used to own a home. I used to be respectable. Now, I was just an old woman with a suitcase trying to find a corner of the world that wouldn't bankrupt me. Finally, I found it. It wasn't an apartment complex. It was a converted garage behind an older house in a working-class neighborhood. The landlord, a no-nonsense woman named Betty, called it a studio. I called it a shoebox. It was 1 room. The kitchen was a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a sink that doubled as the bathroom vanity. The shower was a tiny stall in the corner. The floor was linoleum that was peeling at the edges. "It's $700 a month, utilities included," Betty said, eyeing me over her glasses. "No pets. No loud parties." "I don't party," I said. "I just need quiet." I signed the lease. I moved in that afternoon. The first week was the hardest week of my life. It was a massive downgrade from the mansion in Newport News. I went from sleeping on high-thread couch sheets to a used futon I bought at a thrift store. I went from a kitchen with a 6-burner stove to heating up soup on a hot plate. Money was tight. I had my Social Security check and a very small pension from my husband's job. After rent, medication, and the phone bill, I had barely enough left for food. I became a master of the clearance aisle. I bought day-old bread. I clipped coupons for eggs. I walked everywhere because gas was a luxury I couldn't justify. The nights were the worst. In the silence of that tiny room, the grief would wash over me. I wasn't grieving the money, not really. I was grieving my son. I would lie in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and replay the look on Joe's face when he chose his wife over me. I cried until my pillow was damp. I mourned him like he was dead because the Joe I raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions, was gone. He had been replaced by a stranger who saw me as an ATM. I wondered if I had made a mistake. I wondered if I should have stayed and fought. I wondered if being abused in luxury was better than being lonely in poverty. But then, the second week happened. I woke up on a Tuesday morning. The sun was streaming through the single window, hitting the peeling linoleum. I sat up. The room was quiet. There was no slamming of doors. There was no Amber screaming at the kids. There was no tension in the air, thick enough to choke on. I got up and walked to my tiny kitchenette. I made coffee. I poured it into a mug I had bought for 50 cents. I sat in my thrift store chair and drank it, and then I realized something incredible. My hands weren't shaking. I reached for my glucometer. I hadn't checked it yet that morning. Usually in the mornings at Joe's house, my fasting number was high, around 160 or 170, because of the stress hormones flooding my system from the moment I opened my eyes. I pricked my finger. I waited for the countdown. 108. I stared at the number. 108. I hadn't seen a number that perfect in years. I stood up and took a deep breath. My chest didn't feel tight. My stomach wasn't in knots, wondering if I would get yelled at for using the wrong towel or walking too loudly. I looked around the tiny room. It was small. It was cheap. The faucet dripped, but it was mine. I walked to the fridge. I opened it. There were no sugary traps inside. There was no sweet tea spiked with poison. There was just spinach, eggs, and a carton of almond milk. I was in total control of what entered my body. I realized then that the mansion had been killing me. The stress, the walking on eggshells, the constant cortisol spikes. It was wrecking my body faster than the diabetes ever could. I had traded $80,000 for a shoebox, but in that shoebox, I found something I couldn't buy in Newport News. I found peace. I started a routine. I walked to the library every morning to read the paper for free. I walked to the park in the afternoon. I made friends with Betty, my landlord, who turned out to be a widow too. We started drinking coffee on her porch on Sundays. I was poor. I had to count every penny at the grocery store. I wore the same 3 outfits on rotation. But for the first time in a long time, I was healthy. My skin cleared up. I lost the bloated weight I had been carrying. My doctor cut my insulin dose in half. One evening, sitting in my small chair, eating a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and spinach, I looked at the blank wall. I didn't see a loss. I saw a victory. Joe and Amber had the big house. They had the granite countertops and the fancy cars. But I knew what happened inside those walls. I knew the screaming, the debt, the unhappiness. They were prisoners in their own castle. I was free. I washed my plate in the tiny sink, humming a song to myself. It was a struggle, yes. It was hard, yes. But as I locked my door that night, a lock that I controlled, a door that no one could open without my permission, I knew I would never go back. I had lost a fortune, but I had saved myself. And looking at my reflection in the small bathroom mirror, I saw a woman who was finally, truly alive. 3 months. That is how long it has been since I walked out of that mansion in Newport News and left my life savings on the hallway table. If you had told me 6 months ago that I would be living in a converted garage, sleeping on a thrift store futon, and counting pennies for laundry detergent, I would have cried. I would have been terrified. But looking at myself in the mirror today, I don't see a victim. I see a survivor. I look different. The gray pallor that hung over my skin when I lived with Joe and Amber is gone. My cheeks have color. I've lost 15 pounds, but it's the healthy kind of weight loss. It's the result of walking, not starving myself to avoid conflict at the dinner table. I joined a group called the Silver Striders. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday at the community park. It's just a group of women, mostly my age, walking laps and talking about life. When I first joined, I was ashamed. I didn't want to tell them I was effectively homeless and estranged from my son. But one day, while we were stretching, I let it slip. I told them about the tea. I told them about the $80,000. I expected them to judge me. I expected them to ask why I didn't sue. Instead, a woman named Barb just hugged me. "You bought your life back, honey," she said. "That's the best purchase you ever made." She was right. I am vibrant again. I volunteer twice a week at the local food bank. It feels good to be needed, truly needed, not just used as unpaid labor. When I hand a box of food to a young family, they look me in the eye and say, "Thank you." That is 2 words I never heard in my son's house. But there was one final piece of business I had to attend to, one loose thread that kept snagging on my heart in the quiet moments of the night. Joe. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I left. He had called, of course. In the first week, he called 10 times a day. He sent texts ranging from angry, "You're being ridiculous," to panicked, "We need you to sign some papers for the house refinancing." I blocked the number. I realized he wasn't calling to check on me. He was calling because the bank probably needed my signature to clarify the equity situation. I didn't answer, but I needed to say goodbye properly, not for him, but for me. I sat down at my tiny wobbly table with a pad of lined paper and a blue pen. I didn't want to type it. I wanted him to see my handwriting. I wanted him to see that my hand wasn't shaking anymore. "Dear Joe," I wrote, "I am writing this to let you know that I am safe. I am healthy. And for the first time in a long time, I am happy. I want you to know that I forgive you. I don't forgive you because what you did was okay. It wasn't. You watched your wife hurt me, and you stood by because it was easier than protecting me. You chose your comfort over my life. That is a hard thing for a mother to accept, but I accept it. I forgive you because I cannot carry the weight of that anger anymore. Hate is heavy, Joe. It drags you down, and I am busy walking forward. Regarding the money, keep it. I meant what I said. I will not sue you. I will not drag us into court. You can keep the $80,000. I hope it buys you the peace you think you need. I hope it fixes whatever is broken in your home, though I suspect money isn't the problem. However, I want to be clear about one thing. I have updated my will. I don't have much left, just a few personal effects, and whatever small savings I can build back up. But none of it will come to you. My estate, what little there is of it, will go to the local animal shelter. You chose your inheritance early, Joe. You took it while I was still alive. So we're even. Don't come looking for me. I am no longer your mother, your maid, or your bank. I am just Danielle, and I am finally free. Goodbye. I folded the letter and put it in an envelope. I walked to the post office and dropped it in the blue bin. As I heard it slide down the metal chute, I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. It was done. The cord was cut. That evening, I sat on the small concrete step outside my apartment door. It's not much of a balcony, just a slab of concrete overlooking the alley, but I have a pot of geraniums there, and it gets the evening sun. I brewed a cup of tea. I made it myself. I boiled the water in my kettle. I steeped the bag. I poured it over ice, and I didn't add a single grain of sugar. I took a sip. It was bitter, cold, and refreshing. It tasted safe. I sat there watching the sun go down, thinking about everything I had lost. I am poor. I am living in a space smaller than my old walk-in closet. I will probably never go on a cruise or buy a new car again. My friends from my old life scream at me that I was a fool. They tell me I should have burned that house down with lawyers. They tell me I let Amber win. But did she win? She is stuck in that big, expensive house with a mortgage she can't afford and a heart full of malice. I am sitting here in the sun, listening to the birds, drinking tea that won't kill me. I lost my son, and I lost $80,000 that day. But I woke up this morning. I breathed without gasping. I lived. So I'm asking you, the women watching this who have given everything to their families, the grandmothers who feel invisible, the mothers who are afraid to speak up, did I do the right thing? Was my peace of mind worth walking away from my life savings? Or was I a fool to let them keep the money just to save myself? Tell me in the comments. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away. With love.